Please, I don't want to belong to them." Her voice trembled like a wounded sparrow's wing. "Let me stay with you instead." In the blistering Texas summer of 1870, the words of a hunted Apache girl cracked open the quiet life of a man who thought he had buried his past in the dust. The sun over Black Ridge was the kind that bleached the world bare, an unblinking white eye that burned without mercy. Heat shimmered off the hard-pan earth, and every breath tasted of dust and old sorrow. On that blistering afternoon, Elias Thorne worked alone on the western fence line of his homestead, sleeves rolled high, sweat stinging the scar on his shoulder that never quite let him forget the past. He hammered another nail into the post, the rhythm steady, the land around him silent except for cicadas and the restless shifting of his mare behind him. Black Ridge had given him solitude, but not peace. He told himself they were close enough. Then he heard it, a sound that did not belong to wind or insects, a faint scrape like a stone dragged by a shaking hand. Elias straightened, frowning. The noise came again. From the abandoned well behind the barn. No one went near it anymore. The rope had snapped years ago, and the boards covering it were sun-rotted. Hammer forgotten, Elias reached for the revolver at his belt, not out of fear but instinct carved deep into bone. He walked slowly toward the well, boots crunching dry earth. As he neared, he heard a breathing that was too tight, too controlled. Someone was hiding. He nudged aside the weak planks with the barrel of the gun and peered below. A young woman crouched against the stone wall, dust clinging to her braided hair and torn dress. Her skin was sun-browned, her wrists marked by bruises he recognized all too well. Binding bruises, the kind left by men claiming ownership over things that should never be owned. Her eyes snapped upward, wild, afraid, determined. "Please!" Her voice cracked like brittle clay. "I need refuge. I can't go back to them." Elias froze. The heat, the cicadas, the memories, they all fell away. He saw her as she clung to the edge of the well, breath trembling, a creature half-starved for safety. "I'll work," she whispered. "I won't cause trouble. Just don't send me back." She didn't beg. She stated a truth with the last strength she had. A storm Elias had buried long ago rose in him, memories of a little girl on a burning trail, a girl he could not save. He shut his eyes. It hurt the same now as then. When he opened them, she was still there, gripping the wall like it was the last thing tethering her to this world. He crouched, silence like a tired apology, and extended a calloused hand. "No one owns you," he said quietly. "Not here." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she placed her blood-stiffened fingers in his, and he lifted her into the light. She swayed, barefoot and shaking, but she stood. Elias nodded toward the trough behind the barn. "Water's clean. Wash up. You're safe for now?" She blinked, disbelief flickering into the smallest ember of hope. When she followed him across the yard, soft steps in the dust, neither of them realized it. This was the moment Black Ridge began to change. The first night passed in a hush so fragile Elias felt afraid to breathe too loudly. The young woman, she hadn't given her name yet, slept on the cot nearest the hearth, curled beneath a quilt he hadn't used in years. Elias lay awake in his own bed across the room, staring at the rafters as her quiet, uneven breaths reminded him she was real, not a ghost stitched from memory. At dawn, he rose to find the cot empty. Panic struck before he could stop it. He stepped outside, scanning the yard. There she was, kneeling by the stream behind the house, rinsing out the torn hem of her dress. Her hair hung in a loose braid down her back, dripping with cold water, and the bruises on her arms looked harsher in the morning light. Elias approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You don't have to work," he said. "Not after what you've—" "I'm not resting," she murmured. "If I rest, they catch me." He wanted to ask who they were. He wanted to ask 100 things, but questions felt like pressure, and she was a person who had lived under too much of that already. Instead, he nodded. "Breakfast on the table." She hesitated, then rose, wringing out the fabric of her dress before following him inside. She ate in small, careful bites, like someone who'd been punished for wanting food. After the meal, she set her bowl down and spoke without looking up. "My name is Lyra." He nodded softly. "Elias." Her eyes flickered upward for the briefest moment, then away again. For 2 days they lived like that, parallel, distant, respectful. Lyra swept the porch, mended a torn saddlebag, scrubbed soot off the hearthstones. Elias worked the fields, repaired the barn door, chopped firewood with deliberate heavy strokes. They barely spoke. Both seemed afraid that the wrong word would shatter something fragile between them. On the third morning, riders appeared. 2 men in dust-stained coats with brass badges glinting on their chests. Regional survey officers, nosing around for strays, fugitives, or anything worth reporting. Elias spotted them from the field and swore under his breath. He strode toward the cabin with urgency, though his steps stayed even. Lyra looked up from the water basin, saw the tension in his jaw, and froze. "Inside," he said quietly. "Back door." She didn't hesitate. She slipped inside like smoke, leaving only a ripple of fear behind her. The officers pulled up to the fence, horses snorting. "Morning, Thorn," the taller one called, flipping open a ledger. "Routine check. Anyone else living on the property?" "Just me," Elias said evenly. The younger surveyor frowned toward the cabin. "Thought I saw a woman by your wall a moment ago." Elias didn't blink. "Hired help," he said. "Temporary. Name's Mira." A beat. Then he added, "She's got nowhere else. I can put her to work." The men exchanged a look, the kind that Wade, judged, dismissed. "Well," the officer muttered, snapping his book shut. "Keep her in line. Girls these days wander into trouble too easy." Elias's jaw tightened, but he forced a nod. When the riders left in a cloud of dust, Lyra stepped out from behind the doorframe, her face pale. "You gave me a name," she whispered. Elias kept staring at the empty road. "It was the truth," he said softly. "You deserve one." Lyra touched the edge of the table for balance, breath trembling. For the first time, she believed she might truly stay. Lyra settled into life at Black Ridge like someone expecting the ground to fall out beneath her at any moment. She worked quietly, always watching the tree line, always listening for hoofbeats even when none came. Some evenings, Elias found her sitting by the window long after the fire died down, fingers curled around the sill, as if she might sprint into the night at the first crack of a twig. He didn't ask what haunted her. He just made sure the lamp stayed lit a little longer. By midsummer, the land behind the cabin began to change. Lyra knelt in the soil each morning before dawn, coaxing life from earth most people had given up on. She cleared stones, mixed ash and compost, and planted seeds with hands that trembled only when she stopped working. The first sprout appeared on a Tuesday, thin, brave, impossibly green. Elias had been stacking lumber when he saw her kneeling in front of it, eyes shining with a kind of wonder that hurt to look at. "You made that happen," he said quietly. She shook her head. "The land remembered itself. I only reminded it." Word spread through the valley quicker than Elias liked. Some neighbors rode by, pretending they needed to check a fence or ask about a stray cow, but their eyes always drifted toward Lyra. "That girl's too smart with the dirt," one rancher muttered, forcing a grin. "Almost unnatural." Another scoffed, loud enough for Lyra to hear. "Should have left the wild where it came from." Lyra pretended not to hear them. Elias didn't pretend. He stood beside her each time, broad and silent, his presence enough to send whispers scurrying like startled mice. But the worst was the boys. 3 of them, freckled, mischievous, mean the way only bored children could be, crept to the fence while Lyra tended her young squash vines. They lobbed pebbles at her feet, snickering. "Bet you talk to the plants, don't you?" one jeered. "Bet you cast spells in that dirt," another added, throwing a stone that struck her shoulder. Lyra flinched but kept her gaze on the soil. Her breath came shallow and short. Elias saw the boys from the barn and walked toward them, hammer in hand. Not raised, not threatening, just visible. His shadow stretched long across the ground. As he came to stand behind Lyra, the boys froze, then bolted. Lyra stayed kneeling, eyes fixed on the trembling leaves of her squash plants. "Kids don't know better," Elias said gently. She exhaled, shaky. "Some do," she whispered. "Some just learn too young how to be cruel." That evening, when the shadows lengthened and the air cooled, Lyra wove a small ring of dried sage and grass and hung it above the window. A quiet sign, a marker of protection, a way of telling herself, "Here I plant, here I breathe." Elias noticed the ring but didn't touch it. He simply nodded at her as if to say, "If it gives you peace, it belongs." And for the first time, Lyra allowed her shoulders to soften. She was beginning to root. The fire started so fast it felt unreal, as if the flames had been waiting for the slightest invitation. It was late afternoon, and the day had been calm, too calm, Elias would later think. Lyra was bent over the hearth, stirring a pot of stew thick with beans and herbs she'd picked near the creek. The scent filled the cabin with something warm, something like belonging. Elias was outside repairing the hinge on the barn door, humming under his breath, a tune he hadn't touched in years. Then a gust of wind rushed in through the open window, slapping a drying cloth off its hook. It landed against the fire, and in an instant the fabric flared, flames clawing up the wall like they'd been starving. Lyra gasped and stumbled back. "Elias!" He heard the panic before he saw the glow. Elias sprinted inside, grabbed the heavy wool blanket from the cot, and smothered the flames with the practiced movements of someone who had once lived too close to fires set by angry men. Smoke filled the room in choking waves. As he pressed the blanket down, the boiling stew popped and hissed, splashing against his arm. The burn seared instantly. He grunted, jaw locked, but he didn't stop until the fire was dead. Nothing left but a charred shelf and smoldering cloth. Lyra darted forward. "Your arm. Let me see." "It's fine," he muttered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "No, it's not." Her tone wasn't a plea, it was certainty. She took him by the wrist, pulling him toward the bench. Elias let her, stunned by her sudden steadiness. Lyra rummaged through a small pouch hidden in the cupboard, crushed green leaves, cool rainwater saved from the last storm. She mixed the paste with practiced hands. Elias watched her silently. She moved with quiet precision, her brow furrowed, her breathing even. The touch of her fingers was gentle, reverent almost, as she spread the healing salve along the burn. "You've done this before," he murmured. She kept her eyes on his arm. "People get hurt around the men I used to live with." The words hung between them like smoke. Elias swallowed. He wanted to say something, comfort, anger, anything, but he knew better than to press. Trauma didn't need witnesses. It needed room. When she finished wrapping his arm with linen, Lyra sat back, her hands trembling just a little. "You saved the house," she whispered. "So did you," he replied softly. "You ran toward the fire." She looked at him then, really looked, and something shifted. Something fragile, but unmistakably alive. Later that night, long after the smoke had cleared, Lyra added 2 wildflowers to the sage ring above the window. Yellow petals, small and stubborn. When Elias returned from checking the barn, he paused before it, the flowers catching the lamplight. "You didn't have to risk yourself," he said quietly. Lyra released a long, steady breath. "I've learned staying silent burns worse." He held her gaze, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. The fire had taken almost nothing, but it had given them something neither expected. A moment of unguarded truth. The days that followed were warm, slow, almost peaceful. Lyra worked the garden with a quiet confidence Elias had never seen in her before. The squash leaves unfurled in wide green fans, beans climbed the stakes with stubborn determination, and the earth, once cracked and hostile, began to soften under her care. Elias caught himself watching her sometimes, not out of curiosity anymore, out of something gentler. The way she knelt in the soil, as if listening to the heartbeat of the land. The way she hummed under her breath when she thought no one was nearby. The way she touched the leaves with a tenderness that made even the wind pause. He never told her he noticed, but he did. One afternoon, as cicadas buzzed lazily in the trees, the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the ridge, not hurried, not frantic, but deliberate, heavy. Elias straightened from the fence post he'd been cutting, the hairs on his arms rising in warning. A man rode in slow, his horse dark and sleek, dust clinging to its flanks. The rider was tall, sharp-featured, with a scar running through one eyebrow like a lightning strike. His coat was black, fitted, too fine for ranch work, the kind worn by men who believed the world owed them something. Lyra saw him before he dismounted, the color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "Not him." Elias felt his blood turn cold. The man tipped his hat with a smile that never touched his eyes. "Afternoon, Thorne." "State your business?" Elias replied, stepping forward. "Straight to it, then." The stranger brushed dust off his coat, gaze drifting toward Lyra with an ownership that made Elias's jaw clench. Name's Calder Wade. I believe you have something of mine. She isn't yours, Elias said flatly. Calder's smile sharpened. Runaways always say that. Doesn't change the fact I paid for her work, and paid well. Lyra stood frozen, her hands gripping the handles of the water pail until her knuckles whitened. I'm not going back, she said, voice small but steady. Calder's eyes flashed. You don't get to decide that. Elias took another step closer. She does here. Calder tilted his head, studying Elias for a long moment. You used to be reasonable, he said. Back when you worked the border runs. Heard you were a hell of a tracker, efficient, quiet. Thought we understood each other. We don't, Elias replied. Calder's expression darkened. Harboring someone who owes labor is theft, and I can report you, but I'm a fair man. So I'll offer you a choice. His fingers brushed the gun at his hip, casual as breathing. Hand her over, or stand in the way. Elias dropped the rope he'd been holding and reached behind him, not for a weapon, but for the long-handled shovel leaning against the fence. He held it like a warning. You're not leaving with her. Calder's mirthless laugh echoed across the quiet yard. You going to fight me over a girl who doesn't belong to anyone? She belongs to herself, Elias said. The wind stilled, dust hung suspended in the afternoon light, and then Lyra stepped between them. No, she said sharply, voice trembling but fierce. No blood. Her small figure stood like a barrier made of breath and hope. Elias met her eyes, and the storm inside him eased. He dropped the shovel. Calder sneered, spat into the dirt, and swung onto his horse. This isn't finished! When he rode away, Lyra sank to her knees, breath shaking. Elias stood behind her, hands trembling with a rage he hadn't felt in years. But he didn't lift a weapon because she had asked him not to. And that mattered more than pride, more than fear, more than the past. Night fell heavy over Black Ridge, thick as wool and just as suffocating. Elias barely slept. He sat by the dying fire, nursing the cool cup of water Lyra had left for him on the table. Beside it lay a flat stone, smooth and pale, etched with a small swirling mark drawn in ash. A symbol he did not know, but felt. A symbol of choosing. A symbol of staying. Outside, the crickets droned on, unaware that danger had settled on the homestead like a crouching animal. Lyra slept curled near the hearth, exhaustion pulling her deeper than fear could. Elias watched her for a long moment. The way her brow softened in sleep, the way her fingers twitched as if clutching dreams too fragile to hold. She had spent years running. The world owed her a single night of peace. He promised silently that she would have it, but peace, true peace, was brief. It began as a smell, not smoke from the hearth, something sharper, sour, and wrong. Gasoline. Elias bolted upright. Lyra! She woke instantly, eyes wide. What? Out! Now! Before she could question him, the first window shattered, flames licking through the cracks in the boards. Someone outside whooped with drunken laughter. Calder's men. Elias grabbed Lyra's arm and yanked open the root cellar hatch hidden beneath the shelves, an old tunnel he had dug years ago, when loneliness and fear had convinced him he might someday need a way out. He hadn't thought he'd ever use it, until now. Go, he said, pushing her inside. Lyra didn't hesitate. She slid down into the darkness. Elias followed, pulling the hatch shut just as the flames roared across the ceiling. The tunnel was narrow, barely tall enough to crouch in. Dirt brushed their shoulders as they crawled. Smoke filtered through faint cracks in the boards overhead, and Lyra coughed into her sleeve. Keep close, Elias whispered. We're almost there. Her hand brushed his, a tremor, then trust. They moved together through packed earth until the tunnel sloped upward, leading to a hidden exit beneath tangled brush near the ridge. They emerged into the cold air just as the house erupted in a storm of sparks. From behind the bushes, they watched their home burn. The roof collapsed first, timbers folding inward like a dying animal. Calder's men circled the blaze, laughing, swaying in their saddles. One kicked over the stacked woodpile. Another shouted something slurred and hateful. Lyra pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. Elias stood stone still. rage carving lines across his face. "They came back," he whispered. "They always come back." His voice broke like something old and wounded inside him. Lyra reached for his sleeve, gripping tightly. "You're not alone," she whispered. For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of fire and the cruel laughter of fading hoofbeats. When dawn came, the house was gone, nothing left but charred bones and the ash of memories they had barely begun to build. Elias stepped onto the ruined threshold, fists clenched, eyes hollow. "We had nothing," he said. "We built something, and now—" "It's not the end," Lyra said. He didn't answer, so she bent, picked up a blackened stone, and carved a single word into it with his pocket knife. "Stay." She set it at his feet. He stared at the stone for a long, aching moment. And for the first time since the fire began, something flickered in him. Not hope yet, but the willingness to try. The morning after the fire carried a silence so deep it felt carved into the land itself. Not even the birds dared to break it. Lyra and Elias stood among the ruins, the air still warm with the ghost of flames. Smoke drifted in thin coils from piles of blackened timber. The garden, her garden, was a patchwork of scorched earth and wilted leaves. Lyra knelt beside her once green squash plants. She touched a shriveled vine gently, as though comforting a wounded friend. Elias watched her, pain tightening his chest. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You work so hard." She shook her head. "Life grows back when it can. I have before." Her voice was steady, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. "I just thought I'd finally found somewhere I didn't have to run." Elias looked away. Shame pressed down on him like a physical weight. "You did," he said quietly. "I just didn't protect it well enough." Lyra rose, brushing soot from her palms. "You saved my life. Twice. Don't say you failed me." Her words struck deeper than she knew. They spent the day sifting through the wreckage, salvaging whatever they could. A few metal pots warped by heat. A half-burned blanket. Elias's old journal, its edges singed but the pages inside intact. By afternoon, they had gathered a small pile of belongings, nothing compared to what they had lost, but enough to begin again. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, Elias leaned against the charred frame of the porch and exhaled a heavy breath. "We can go to town tomorrow," he said. "Get supplies. I'll find us a place to stay while we rebuild." Lyra hesitated. "Elias, Calder isn't finished. He'll come back." "I know." Elias's jaw tightened. "But I won't let him take you, and I won't run from men like him ever again." Lyra stepped closer, searching his face. "Why? You don't owe me anything." He met her gaze then, steady, unguarded. "I don't protect you because I owe you," he said. "I protect you because I choose to." Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a fear melting into something gentler. Before she could answer, a twig snapped in the woods. Elias pushed Lyra behind him instantly, scanning the tree line. A moment later, a familiar voice called out, "Easy now, it's just me." A broad man with a thick mustache stepped out from the trees, Briggs, one of the kinder ranchers from the neighboring valley. He raised both hands to show he meant no harm. "Came when I saw the smoke," Harlan said, eyes widening as he took in the destruction. "Hell, Elias! What happened?" Elias exchanged a glance with Lyra. "Calder Wade," he said. "He torched the place." Harlan's jaw dropped. "That snake? I knew he caused trouble in other towns, but this—" He shook his head, fury rising. "You two come stay at my ranch. No arguments." "We don't want to bring trouble to your door," Elias protested. Harlan scoffed. "Calder won't try anything in broad daylight on my land, and if he does, he'll answer to more than one rifle." Lyra's breath hitched. Kindness always seemed to startle her. Harlan softened his tone. "Please, at least until you're back on your feet." Elias looked at Lyra. "It's your choice." Her eyes swept the ruin behind them, the ashes, the broken beams, the burned memories. Then she looked at Elias, at the man who had saved her, stood for her, and lost his home because of her. Lyra nodded. "Let's go." Elias exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. Harlan smiled broadly and led the way through the trees toward his ranch. For the first time since the fire, Lyra allowed herself to hope. They were leaving ashes behind, but they were not walking alone. Harlan Briggs's ranch sat in a wide cradle of soft hills, the kind sculpted by gentle rains and patient time. As Lyra and Elias approached, the scent of hay and horses drifted through the evening air, mingling with the sweet aroma of bread cooling on an open windowsill. It felt like stepping into a different world, one untouched by fire, fear, or the echo of angry hoofbeats. Harlan's wife Mara hurried out as soon as she saw them. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her eyes shimmered with concern. "Oh, you poor things," she murmured, pulling Lyra into a warm embrace before the younger woman had time to react. Lyra stiffened at first. Touch had always been something she braced for, but Mara's arms held nothing but comfort. Slowly, Lyra's shoulders loosened. "You're safe here," Mara whispered. "Both of you." Inside, the kitchen buzzed with the clatter of pans and the soft murmur of family voices. A fire crackled in the hearth, warm and steady. Lyra stood near it, fingers lightly grazing the stone mantel, as if needing to reassure herself that this fire was tame, controlled, unlike the one that had robbed her of home. Elias remained by the doorway, hat in hand, the weight of gratitude and guilt wrapped tight around him. But when Mara pressed a warm bowl of stew into his hands, the tension in his jaw softened. "Eat," she said firmly. "You look like you've swallowed dust and grief." Harlan chuckled. "She's right. Sit, man. We've got room." They ate. The table was crowded with food. Fresh bread, stew, roasted squash, berries. Lyra watched the Briggs family talk and laugh, their voices rolling like gentle thunder. No shouting, no threats, no fear. Just warmth. And for the first time in years, she let herself breathe without flinching. After supper, Mara showed Lyra to a small guest room overlooking the pasture. The bed was soft, covered in a quilt stitched with tiny blue flowers. Lyra touched the pattern with reverence. "I've never had a room before," she whispered, barely audible. Mara's expression softened. "Well, you have one now." Meanwhile, Harlan led Elias to the barn where he'd be staying. The loft was clean, with fresh hay and a wool blanket folded neatly at the foot of a narrow cot. "You protected that girl," Harlan said while lighting a lantern, "and she trusts you. That's worth more than anything burned down back there." Elias met his gaze, surprised by the blunt kindness. "I don't know if I did enough." Harlan snorted. "Son, none of us ever feel like we've done enough. That's how we know we're trying." Later that night, Lyra wandered outside, unable to sleep. She found Elias leaning against the fence, the lantern casting warm gold across his face. She stood beside him, both of them gazing at the stars. "You lost so much because of me," she said quietly. He turned to her, his voice low and steady. "Lyra, you're not what I lost." She inhaled shakily. "What am I then?" He hesitated, just a beat, before answering. "Someone I can't walk away from." The words rippled through her, soft and terrifying and beautiful. Lyra looked at the stars again, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. "So, what do we do now?" "We start over," Elias said simply. "Together." And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something chasing her. It felt like something calling her home. The morning arrived with a quiet dignity, the sun spilling gold over the rolling hills, glinting against dew-soaked grass. Lyra rose first, slipping out of the small guest room to find the farm already alive with movement. Birds sang from the cottonwoods by the creek, and in the distance a mule brayed at the rising day. It was a peace she had never known. Not really, not after the fire, not after the running, not after the long nights of hiding in the dust and shadows. She walked barefoot along the soft earth, feeling it give slightly under her feet, each step a reminder that she belonged somewhere now. Elias was already at work, stacking firewood with steady, methodical movements, sweat beading at his temple. He looked up, catching her gaze, and smiled, a small curve of lips that carried more reassurance than any words could. "Morning," he called, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Morning," she replied softly, her voice still rough from sleep. She carried with her a small basket of herbs Mara had given her, fragrant leaves of sage and mint she intended to dry and keep for the hearth. "I thought I'd start on some drying. For tea." Elias nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. They moved silently together through the early light, a rhythm forming between them without effort. Lyra realized she hadn't felt this sense of calm since her mother's voice had faded in the smoke-filled night of her childhood. Here, in this place, she could finally breathe without expecting the sky to fall or the ground to betray her. By mid-morning, Mara brought out bread she had baked the night before, still warm and golden. Lyra helped set the table outside on a rough-hewn plank, the smell of pine and freshly turned earth mingling with the bread and herbs. Elias joined her, handing her a steaming mug of tea. They ate slowly, savoring the quiet. No one was chasing them, no one threatened them, and for a moment, just a fleeting one, Lyra allowed herself to hope that maybe, finally, safety was permanent. Later, the two of them began work on the garden. Lyra knelt in the soil, her fingers tracing lines where new seeds would go. Corn, squash, beans, everything that had once been destroyed would bloom again. Elias worked beside her, his hands large and steady, covering the seeds with soft earth. They talked sparingly, but every glance, every shared movement carried understanding. "You're not just planting seeds," Elias said quietly, almost to himself. "You're planting hope." Lyra's lips curved into a small smile. "And you're helping it grow." By evening, the garden bed was complete, the soil neatly mounded, the rows straight and promising. Mara and Harlan came out to inspect their work, both nodding with approval. Lyra felt a rare warmth swell in her chest, a pride not in survival alone, but in creating something lasting. That night, as the family gathered for supper, Elias and Lyra sat side by side, the flickering lantern light painting their faces with gold. Lyra leaned slightly toward him, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't pull away, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to relax fully, to imagine a future where the horizon wasn't always a threat, where fire and blood didn't define her every step. After the dishes were done and the lamps dimmed, Lyra went to the small window of her room. She traced her fingers over the wooden frame, thinking of the ashes and the burned-out house that had been her home, her prison, her past. And yet, she didn't feel loss as sharply tonight. Not fully, because what had been burned was gone. Yes, but here, with Elias, Mara, and Harlan, there was life. There was growth. There was hope. She whispered to herself, almost like a promise, "We will bloom again." Elias's voice called softly from the hallway. "Lyra, come here for a moment." She rose, following him outside. The night sky stretched endlessly above, stars spilling like silver dust across black velvet. Elias extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. In that simple gesture, the weight of the past seemed to lift, leaving only the warmth of shared strength, the quiet pulse of connection. They stood together in the night, listening to the soft wind, feeling it carry away the ash of old fears, and for the first time, Lyra believed it. The world could be kind. They had found a place that welcomed them, and each other. Spring had fully returned to Black Ridge, painting the hills in shades of green that had seemed impossible just months before. The garden Lyra and Elias had nurtured flourished with life. Cornstalks swayed gently in the breeze, beans climbed their wooden trellises, and squash blossoms dotted the ground with bursts of gold. The air was fragrant with earth and growth, a balm to every wound they carried. Lyra stood at the edge of the garden, hands deep in the soil, and let the sun warm her face. Her hair, once tangled and matted from endless running, now caught the light in a soft braid over her shoulder. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She turned as Elias approached, carrying a small watering can. He set it down and knelt beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You've done this," he said softly, voice thick with awe. "All of this. It's yours as much as anyone's." She smiled, a real unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "We've done it together," she replied. Her hands still trembled faintly, not from fear, but from the power she felt in creation, in choosing to stay, to fight, to grow, instead of flee. The cabin behind them was sturdy now, its new stone hearth and pine walls a testament to persistence. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, carrying the scent of supper. Mara and Harlan were inside, preparing a meal that promised warmth and comfort. The village had begun to visit again, drawn by whispers of the small homestead that had refused to die, a place where kindness and skill were building a quiet community. Children ran along the paths between the garden and the creek, laughing, free in a way Lyra had only dreamed of. Elias reached for her hand, intertwining fingers, letting the connection speak what words could not. "You're safe," he said simply. "No one can take this from us." Lyra's gaze fell on the small carved beam above the cabin door, her name etched in wood, a permanent reminder that she belonged somewhere. A warmth spread in her chest. "I think," she whispered, "we finally belong." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in lavender and rose, the family gathered outside. They placed fresh flowers in a small vase on the table, a ritual of gratitude for the life they had rebuilt. Lyra's eyes caught the gaze of a young girl from the village, shy and wide-eyed. She knelt and offered her a handful of seeds. "Plant these," she said gently. "Grow them, watch them bloom. You'll see how strong life can be." The child's smile mirrored her own from years ago, and Lyra felt a surge of hope. This giving, this sharing, was the life she wanted, not one of hiding or fear, but of connection, of growth, of choosing each day to stay and nurture, even after loss. As night fell, Elias and Lyra sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the stars emerge one by one. The wind carried the faint scent of rain from distant hills, promising more life, more growth. Lyra rested her head on Elias's shoulder. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't flinch at the sound of hooves in the distance. She didn't wonder if fire or men in black leather would descend again. Here, in the warmth of this place, she was free. Elias whispered, "You've made me believe, Lyra. You've made me believe that people and land can heal." She smiled against him, heart full. "We've made this," she said, "together." The wind carried the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of night birds, and the gentle laughter of children echoing through the valley. And in that moment, with the stars overhead and the life around them, Lyra and Elias knew that even after ash, fire, and sorrow, there could always be bloom. Love, hope, and home could rise again, stronger than before. They stayed on the porch until the moon climbed high, hand in hand, hearts tethered to each other and to the earth that had welcomed them back. And for the first time in a long while, the world felt safe, bright, and theirs.